The international relations expert, Mohammed El-Yemeni. Thank you very much for being here with us on Q News. So Netanyahu is in pursuit of this presidential pardon and says it's for the good of the country. Is it for the good of the country or for the good of Netanyahu?
Good evening to you and to everyone who's watching. Of course, it is in Netanyahu's favor because ever since he started the aggression on the Gaza Strip, he had so many crimes, and his political future in Israel has been compromised. So this is something, and then the second thing here, he has elections upcoming in October 2026, and he is preparing for them, and he's talking about a presidential pardon after the US President Donald Trump has asked for this presidential pardon from Israel's president. And then the other thing, I think that about 2 months ago, or maybe even less, President Donald Trump talked about or he threatened the internal officials in Israel if they have any punishments, if they issue any punishments on Netanyahu, and then he will stop the support or the aid coming from the USA to Israel. And yeah, Netanyahu wants to run in the next elections without any issues or problems. And in my opinion, I think that this would be very hard for several reasons, because the Israeli aggression is still ongoing, and here maybe one of them could change. The things could change greatly in South Lebanon, and then the presidential pardon, if they listen to him, will they listen to him with US pressure, or are things now different in some kind of way, and with some and they will hold Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu accountable. And then number four here, presidential pardon needs some conditions, like they said, and they're calling for something. So for 2 years now, did Netanyahu really put the Middle East in some kind of conflict tornado, or a continuing state of war? As you know, Israel has actually lost millions of dollars, and they have lost on so many levels, actually, with institutions and all the fields in Israel, and even people are leaving Israel to Europe now, and the numbers are very high. But Netanyahu still doesn't care about all of this, and he is keeping up with his occupation and keeping up with his policy and the Israeli vision, or the Israeli policy in the Middle East. And so, in my opinion, I think that this presidential pardon, if it was actually implemented in Israel, then the reason would be the USA, actually. They will be the ones supporting and putting pressure on Israel to get Netanyahu his presidential pardon.
Yeah, so what should the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, do at this point? Should he be trying to put pressure on the president not to pardon the prime minister?
If we talk about opposition here, let me make something very clear for everyone who's watching. Opposition here, if yeah, of course, they are opposing Netanyahu, but still they support the far right government, and they support Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and Netanyahu's policy. I'm talking here about their support with the aggression on the Gaza Strip, Syria, and Lebanon. They support Netanyahu's policy in the Middle East. And but then something else is that the opposition now actually, we can say that the Israeli opposition here they won't really pressure or influence the president's decisions. They will not. They're not likely to change anything about the presidential pardon. But here we can expect any scenario. Will this actually be in favor of Netanyahu on some levels for his political mess ups? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so that he can run in the elections in the upcoming year. But actually, this is not as easy here, because before the aggression on the Gaza Strip, um, they were talking about crimes or corruption cases from Netanyahu, or with the green light from Netanyahu, like the war on the Gaza Strip. And actually, Israel now has forgotten about these cases, but the corruption cases are still hanging and are still actually happening. That they haven't been closed once and for all, or settled once and for all. And then it did Netanyahu talk or ask for this presidential pardon in this time, because he knows that his policy is very clear. He tries to take advantage of any crisis or any situation so that he can manipulate it to his own favor and to get a win out of it. We've seen this happen a lot. He's always talking about his wins. And so in my opinion, I don't think that he's actually won anything. But the Israeli occupation forces have actually harmed the Middle East and drove the Middle East into a very dark tunnel here. And they had the support of the US. But here, since we're talking about Israel and internally, they have some very important things that have to do with the far right government and some of the parties. They're always and I want to say something very important here. When there were demonstrations in Israel, where there were hundreds of thousands of people, and of them were the families of the detainees, and they were against Netanyahu. But this didn't actually change anything about Netanyahu's policy or what he was doing. And so this means that he can do whatever he wants. And actually, we have here Israel's president. If he receives much pressure, or if he had gets in contact with the U.S. President Trump, then I think Netanyahu will be granted a presidential pardon for so many reasons that have to do with Netanyahu's future. And Netanyahu thinks of himself as the last king of Israel, and that he needs to do everything in his power to achieve what can be achieved, and for Israel to achieve all of its goals in the Middle East, so he can remain in the office.
And how might Netanyahu's legal battles affect his coalition and even party dynamics? Might they smell weakness? And what about the public? You mentioned the public there and the demonstrations that have taken place against Netanyahu. What would the public think? It's quite humiliating, is it not, for their prime minister to have to go to the president to request a pardon?
Of course, the public are very angry about this, but as I said, the Prime Minister doesn't actually listen or take into account all of these things. And as I talked about the demonstration, we've seen demonstrations over the past year, and by the start of this year, and even before the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement that was signed by President Donald Trump and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And then, so this is something. And then here, when the Prime Minister Netanyahu asks for something, this actually means that this man here isn't stupid like some people may claim. But as I've been following up on everything for the past 2 years, Netanyahu rarely asks for anything. He asked favors from the US or from the Western countries that have alliance with Israel, and he rarely asks for anything in Israel, and then anything that he asked for had to do with the war and the aggression on the Gaza Strip and so on. And so this is something here. Another thing is the core of his request here is or does this request affect Netanyahu's future? No, because here Netanyahu is supported by the Jew, and they are pressuring US President Donald Trump to grant him all the support and the aid that he needs. And as we've seen, the US spokesperson arrived in Israel. They've talked about having very tight relationships, and that there were some conflict between President Donald Trump and Netanyahu. It is as if history is repeating itself, because this happened with Joe Biden also, and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. And so this is something here. And then another thing is that Ben Gvir, Netanyahu and Smotrich are actually focusing and putting all their effort in the West Bank. I don't want to talk about so many things, so I don't want to talk. I'm talking here about the presidential pardon and what's happening in Israel and outside too, and what's happening in the Middle East, because Netanyahu thinks now that things are interlinked, and so he needs to do everything in his power to guarantee his future so that he can win the elections. He's basically campaigning in Israel, because since the aggression on the Gaza Strip, he has been thinking of himself as the king, and we've seen him do this with lots of things like Hezbollah, and he's been attacking the officials of Hamas and Hezbollah. And so all of this, he's been campaigning all of these as wins, attacking Hezbollah and Hamas and other factions. And so it's as if he's talking on behalf of the Israeli president. What he's done over the past 2 years is benefits greater Israel. Is taking some parts of Lebanon and Syria, everything that happened in the Gaza Strip. That he achieved goals with this. With destruction of the infrastructure in Gaza, and that he can eradicate resistance in the Middle East. He is having incursions and annexing large lands in Syria, for example, and with everything that's happening in the Gaza Strip. And then we have action and reaction, everything that's happening in Yemen as well. And so he's campaigning or using all of these to make Israel think that these are wins and to get his presidential pardon. But if he actually gets that pardon, I think that this would actually be very important for Netanyahu's future. But as I've mentioned just before, this actually made the public very angry. Him in Tel Aviv and other cities in Israel.
Well, Mohammed Al-Yemeni, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great to have your thoughts, international relations expert. Thank you very much indeed.